Good evening. This is Vice Chair Dave Houghton. I'd like to call this regular meeting of the Planning Commission to order. And so let's do the Pledge of Allegiance. So here we go.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Flores?
Here.
Commissioner Jorgensen?
Here.
Commissioner Khan?
Here.
Commissioner Munoz Morris will be absent. Commissioner Tully?
Here.
Vice Chair Houghton?
Here.
And Chair Cooley will be absent tonight.
Okay, it's public comment. For this time, we'll hear any public comment for items not on tonight's agenda. Items raised are generally referred to staff, and if action by the commission is necessary, may be scheduled for a future meeting. And Deputy City Clerk, do we have any public comment?
Chair, I haven't received any requests to speak at this time. However, if members of the audience did want to speak on either item that's coming up for a public hearing, please fill out one of these cards located behind me and give it to me so that I know when to call your name. Otherwise, I do not have any comments.
Any last minute cards out there? Okay. Okay, so we have the consent. Before I call for the vote, do any commissioners have comments on the consent? Any comments, anyone? Do I have a motion and a second to approve the consent? All in favor, say aye. Well,
Aye.
I skipped ahead there. We need a motion first. That's my first time. I'm a little nervous. Okay. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
I'll make a second.
Thank you. And now, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, say no. Consent passes. Thank you. All right, we're moving on to public hearing now. Any court challenge to the action taken on public hearing items on this agenda may be limited to considering only those issues raised at the public hearing or in written correspondence delivered to the City of San Luis Obispo at or prior to the public hearing. If you wish to speak, please give your name and address for the record. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. But we don't have any comments, so I didn't even need to read that probably, right? Okay.
So it's good to read it just to set
yeah.
the expectation.
Okay. The public hearing item before us now is to review a conditional use permit to establish a fraternity at East Foothill Boulevard in Monte Vista Place. And this is item 4A on our agenda. So would Associate Planner Hannah Hahn please present the report?
Thank you. My name is Hannah Hahn, and tonight's first public hearing item is a request by Lambda Chi Alpha for a conditional use permit to establish their fraternity. The project site is a developed property located at East Foothill and Monte Vista that includes 4 separate buildings with a total of 6 units on site. The associated addresses include 1264 and 1264 and a half East Foothill, along with 1241, 1243, 1249, and 1251 Monte Vista. This CUP application covers the entire site, including all residences for this fraternity. The site includes access from both East Foothill and Monte Vista and is located in the R4 zone, surrounded by other high-density residential uses such as other fraternities, sororities, multifamily residences, and is also located within a quarter mile of Cal Poly campus. The proposed fraternity would be for a maximum of 24 members. In order to facilitate their project, minor site improvements would be required to revise the surface parking areas and establish a total of 18 required parking spaces. These site improvements would also include a request to provide tandem parking on the west driveway along East Foothill. Shown here is the proposed site plan. The site is a through lot. To the right is the frontage along Foothill, and then to the left is access via Monte Vista. In order to provide sufficient parking for their fraternity, the surface parking spaces would be restriped. To the left, 4 parallel spaces labeled 1 through 4 would be established, and the non-compliant diagonal spaces that are currently in tandem to the garages would be removed. And in the middle of the site towards Foothill, the surface parking area would also be restriped to more efficiently provide additional parking spaces. In doing so, the 2-car garage for Building B, just directly above that parking area, would be turned into a 1-car garage. The space within this garage, one space within this garage would be lost due to the revised parking design. However, it would be permitted as a general storage area. And lastly, 2 tandem spaces would also be established along the west driveway on Foothill to provide a total of 18 spaces. While these 2 spaces are in tandem, there would be minimal impact to overall site maneuverability due to the presence of the second driveway located on the east side, which is towards the top of that exhibit there. Provided here is the floor plan for Building A, which is a 2-bedroom unit located towards East Foothill. There are no changes proposed as part of this building. And then provided here is a floor plan for Building B, which is a 2-bedroom unit located closer to East Foothill. And as mentioned, the 1 parking space within this garage would be removed in order to accommodate for the revised surface parking area. And that space would be permitted as general storage for the fraternity. And lastly, here are the floor plans for the duplexes that are located towards the Monte Vista side. These are mirrored floor plans that include 1 and 2-bedroom units. No changes are proposed for these buildings. The property is located in the high-density residential land use designation and zone, which are both intended for dense multifamily housing. As proposed, a fraternity would be consistent with the intent of both the land use designation and the zone. To address concerns related to noise, parking, general property maintenance and such, standard conditions for fraternities and sororities were established as part of the 2018 comprehensive update to the zoning regulations. And so the updated standard conditions were focused on the number of residences, routine gatherings, having university affiliation, providing contact information, establishing parking requirements, and lastly, just requiring a standard condition for this use permit to be reevaluated. And so for this project, there are conditions limiting the number of maximum residents to a total of 24. In addition, routine gatherings would also be a maximum of 48 people, which is based on the overall lot size and also average population density in the R4 zone. If there are special events involving more than 48 people, prior approval would need to be obtained from the Community Development Department. University affiliation, having the organization remain affiliated and in good standing with Cal Poly would be required on an ongoing basis as well. Contact information would also be provided on an ongoing annual basis for responsive parties to both the community development and police departments as part of their use permit. And lastly, parking was also established to require a total of 18 spaces based on total bedroom count for 12. While these conditions may be standard for fraternities and sororities since 2018, it's within your commission's purview if you would like to further refine or add any additional conditions. I also wanted to highlight that the project would also be subject to other requirements of the municipal code. Specific chapters of Title IX are highlighted above. The noise ordinance requires quiet hours, which are equivalent to normal conversation levels between the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. And also, and there is also a new ordinance regarding unruly gatherings, which was adopted in 2018. And so with this ordinance, it identifies what would be considered unruly gatherings and prohibits them. And so it would address any gatherings of 20 people or more on a property that would result in a substantial disturbance of the quiet enjoyment of the immediate neighborhood. To address further noise concerns that were brought up in public correspondence, and to also clarify permitted activities for a fraternity, staff is recommending the new condition in blue. This condition states that live entertainment, bands, and/or amplified sounds are prohibited unless otherwise approved through a special event by the Community Development Department. This condition would prevent amplified music or sounds unless it is associated with a special event that the Community Development Department would need to review and approve. And lastly, regarding the environmental review, staff finds the project exempt from environmental review under section 15301 for existing facilities. This project would be a continuation of a residential use and only include minor site improvements for parking with no construction of a new building or additional building square footage. As such, staff recommends that the Planning Commission adopt the draft resolution approving the conditional use permit subject to the findings and conditions of approval as revised to address the amplified music or sound. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. Okay, so the way this works next is the Planning Commission will ask questions of staff. Public comment comes after that, and we can have more questions and discussions, then we go to a vote. So at this time, I'll see if we have questions from our commission, and I'll start with Commissioner Hahn. And did you have your, are you number two? Cheryl? You know, okay. Okay, all right.
I'd just like to give an ex parte communication report that I did visit the site on Monday afternoon, walked onto the site, was greeted by 4 or 5 residents, talked to them for 4 or 5 minutes about the lay of the land and just looked at the property and left.
Thank you, and I will also report that I visited the property today, actually, and I talked with Tommy and got a brief tour. I was on site for about 5 minutes and got the lay of the land, so to speak. Anybody else have anything to report along those lines? Okay, any questions for staff from the commission? Commissioner Jorgensen, your light is red.
It was a good report, Hannah. Thank you for that. So there were a lot of concerns about noise and after hours kinds of activities, and it sounds like you're recommending a new condition that would help address that. So we may hear from people and may still have more questions about that. I wanted to go back to just one voicemail I heard today about the lack of any kind of trash collection called out in the architectural plans and the site plans, and just wondering how that's going to be handled.
Yes, so just to clarify regarding the possibility of a new trash enclosure, in reading that section of our zoning regulations again, that section would apply if there is a new multifamily development. In this case, it'll be a fraternity in an existing development, and so it wouldn't trigger the reassessment for whether or not there is sufficient trash facilities on site. But I do imagine any existing bins or receptacles that they do have would continue to serve the building with this number of residents.
So the current, well, there's no current use, but before 2021, I guess there was still people living there. So people had their own trash barrels and they rolled them all out somehow to Monte Vista, I take it?
Yes.
I mean, and the parking that's there won't be in the way of that? There's still that one driveway that people can use?
Yes, along the east Foothill side, there are 2 driveways, and tandem spaces would only be established on one of them. And so there would still be
I
clear
see.
access.
I see. And so, do we presume there's green waste and recycling and gray waste, for each unit, for each occupant, for?
I'm not familiar with what their current receptacles are. I'll defer to Thomas Simar, and he's here representing the fraternity, and he can let you know about current receptacles.
Okay, thank you.
Tommy, you want to step up and address that?
And Chair, if I could, just 1 second, I want to try to fix how the cameras are showing right now. So if I'll just turn off all of the mics really quick and change a setting, and it'll just take a moment. Okay, it looks like the cameras are stuck, so we're just gonna have to leave it how it is. Sorry about that.
Okay, Mr. Summer, you want to talk trash with us?
I'd love to, yeah. So you guys saw the site plan. Every unit that has a Foothill address has trash cans that live behind that address and are taken to the street like any other resident in the neighborhood would. Any address that is associated with Monte Vista has the same. In the back parking lot, there's a dumpster and a few trash cans, similar to how every other resident in SLO would get their trash picked up.
So you have trash collection on both streets?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Just to the street on the other?
I don't think there's a dumpster.
There's like a, it's like a small rolling dumpster. They roll it down when the trash truck comes by, and there's a few cans they also roll down.
So we would call that a bin, I think, rather than a dumpster?
Yeah,
Is
it's
that
not,
right?
okay. Yeah.
Clear enough? Okay. Does that answer the question about trash enclosures?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know it's often a concern that these cans would be seen from the street. We take it upon ourselves to ensure that people never see our trash. You can go drive past the front yard. It looks really good right now. We take pride in our house, so thank you.
Other questions from the commission?
Yes. When they apply for having an event that is over 48 members, and they have to get a special event permit, what does that involve exactly?
So that special event permit would be similar to a temporary use permit application that we have. It'll include the date or a series of dates, as well as attendance, kind of the hours, as well as any anticipated activities on the site as well. And we'd be evaluating for both any potential noise concerns. So if, let's say they were to have any live entertainment, and also kind of based on the anticipated number of attendees, there may be some additional considerations as to how they would accommodate all of those attendees on site. Are people walking there? Do they it just depends on sort of the scope of who would be attending. Would they be walking there? Would they be driving or cycling there?
Yeah. I think it's very important that they have those, because the tightness of the site and the surrounding area that they do have that. Thank you.
Could I follow up on that? Oh, go ahead. No, it's okay. Sorry, no,
Jorgensen.
sorry. Gotta be quick to these things, huh? I don't know. So there were concerns from the public that there were older regulations, maybe dating back to 2001, that the Planning Commission reviewed that appeared to include notification of nearby residents when there was a special event and things like that. Are those still any part of the special event permit, or are those now not active?
So for special event permits, the way that the condition is currently written, it would go, this permit would be coming to staff for review. And so there's no, I suppose, public notification that's built into that review process. If you would like to further refine that condition to add additional language to establish sort of like a noticing buffer of sorts, if, let's say, a special condition were to take place, that would be within your purview.
Well, it may not be practical. Another piece of all of that was that the neighbors would also have current information on exactly who's in charge of the event and someone responsible who could answer questions and take phone calls and that kind of thing. Is that still either in the permit or in the conditions? That was another piece that was active in 2001, it looked like, for fraternity.
Yes. In regards to having contact information available, we do have a condition in place to address that. It's condition number 7 as part of the draft resolution. And so for the life of the organization, the fraternity would be responsible for providing both the name and contact information of their responsible parties to both community development and the police department as well. And if there's any change, then staff would be notified immediately. And so if there is a concern in the neighborhood, they can coordinate with staff in order to obtain latest contact info.
Or in the middle of the night, call the police, it sounds like.
Right.
Thank you.
Commissioner Tolley.
You kind of took the words out of my mouth. So my concern was neighborhood notification for these special events, especially those special events that are, if I saw it correctly, over 20 people or gatherings over special events with amplified music and things like that. And you're saying, again, that there's no neighborhood notification for if they register for those?
As drafted, the conditions don't include any notification to the neighbors.
Anything else on this side or this side? I have my own list. I'm waiting to go last. I always have a list, okay. Okay, so there was a previous approval for a permit for a fraternity. It was a much smaller number of occupants that expired in 2021 due to inactivity, is what the package said. Can you say what kind of, I mean, has there been nobody at the site? And what's been happening since 2021? Has nobody been living on this site? Or has it been really effectively a fraternity house and we're just now in kind of cleaning that up and getting official?
Oh, yes. So to clarify, like you mentioned, there was a previous conditional use permit on the site that expired in 2021 due to inactivity. That was around the time in which the property had been sold to now the current owners. And so, like you mentioned, that conditional use permit was for a much smaller number and specifically for just the 2 buildings located closer to Foothill. And so as a part of this application, Lambda Chi Alpha is now looking to formally establish their fraternity at the site for up to 24 members now.
Okay, what's been going on in those houses since 2021? Has it been effectively used as such?
Yes, I would say so. We did receive their application for the CUP prior to when a notice of violation was submitted to their property. So they were in the works to obtain their use permit approval, but I believe they started operating before.
Okay, so they applied for a new conditional use permit, and subsequent to that, there was a notice of violation that they didn't have a permit to be a frat house.
Right.
Okay, and are they 2 separate legal properties?
It's one property.
Okay, and is there any affiliation between the owners of the property and the fraternity itself?
I believe it is owned by their organization. I'll defer to Thomas to confirm.
Yeah, so our organization, you know, the housing budget is managed by a housing commission. Just basically guys that founded the fraternity in the 80s. They manage the portfolio of money that operates the house. And yeah, they own it. We're directly in contact with them day-to-day basis, so. Yeah.
Okay, so it's owned by former fraternity members? Oh,
Yeah,
good
it's
for you
owned by a
guys.
nonprofit that they formed
Right.
a few years ago to
Right.
manage the money that the fraternities accumulated over the years.
Okay, so basically it's your property.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thanks, Tommy. The gathering, this difference between gatherings and special events is something that seems to be a sticking point. The application talks about 3 scheduled or anticipated special events that are associated with Rush, or was a philanthropy meeting or something like that. Is that I guess I'll ask this of the proponent, is that a realistic estimate of how many special events with more than 48 people are likely to be happening on this property?
Yeah, I would say it's more in the 5 to 6 range. We have 1 philanthropy event per quarter, so that'd be 3. Oftentimes they don't take place at the house, but probably 1 to 2 philanthropy events, 2 Rush events, 1 in fall, 1 in winter, and maybe a parents' weekend every other year.
Okay, thanks. Following up on Commissioner Hahn's comment about the special event permit review process, the document calls for a transportation management plan. Does that really happen? Do fraternities submit a transportation management plan when they're going to have a party?
I confirmed with our code enforcement staff, and unfortunately, we haven't received a recent submittal of a transportation plan. Usually what it would include is, the number of attendees and how those attendees are getting to the site. So, kind of an anticipated number and how sort of different allocations of, are you walking there, driving, or cycling?
Okay. Just trying to imagine what that would look like. I went to college myself. I've got 2 college daughters. One's done and one's graduating day after tomorrow. I know what sort of things, I know what the parties look like. So just trying to imagine that. I wanted to confirm that the fraternity is in fact in good standing with the Cal Poly IFC. Is that, can we confirm that?
Yes, they're in good standing.
Okay, great. What's the status of this this SNAP organization, which is kind of a student-led patrol of sorts that has maybe the first level of response in quieting things down or in enforcement action?
Yes, so SNAP stands for the Student Neighborhood Assistance Program. They're a group of students, student patrols who are part of the neighborhood outreach section of the police department's operations bureau. To help alleviate the workload, these students are the first responders to any sort of noise or parking violations in the area. And so, these patrols would go out there first. If there's a subsequent issue on the site, then a police officer would be coming out.
Okay. I want to pause for a second, just to ask, are public comments, are the yellow cards piling up for this? Are we going to expecting to hear from the public?
I still haven't received. Please bring your
Yeah,
comment
go ahead and
cards
bring
up.
those up so we just know that we're going to hear. Okay. In going through the public comments, there was I sometimes like to kind of summarize what those are about. Mostly they're about noise and enforcement. There was a comment that there's some 80 houses, fraternity houses, and only 7 of them are legal. Do we have any way of knowing if that is accurate?
I don't have the exact number of investigations that code enforcement is currently working through. I believe it's a larger work effort that is still in the works. However, I can confirm that within the last few weeks or so, there were 22 notices of violations that were sent out. These are for different properties where it's confirmed that members of fraternities or sororities live there, and they were hosting events for their organization. And then an additional 33 advisory notices were sent out. These are for properties where, events did take place, but it's unclear whether or not members of a fraternity or sorority live there. And there is a remaining list of investigations that code enforcement is working through.
Okay. And does Lambda Chi Alpha operate other houses in San Luis Obispo? And I'll ask that of Tommy. Is it okay if I call you Tommy?
Yeah.
Okay.
We have members that all collectively live in houses. We do not operate those houses. Those are, as far as I see it, I'm the president of the organization. Those are just guys that live in a house together.
Okay, so they're not fraternity houses, although there's fraternity members in them.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I guess part of that is the root of this 80 versus 7 thing. And I guess what I would say there is, this is the way it's supposed to work, that you actually do apply and get a permit for what's going to be, or sort of already is, a fraternity house. And so it sounds like there's probably a lot more of these that need to happen to get official. And also, I would appreciate that you actually applied for this before the violation. That's nice. Okay, thanks for that. Okay. So many of the comments wanted to have a 10 p.m. to 9 a.m. Exclusion for, and I think what they're referring to here is not special use, but just, what was the word, engagements or gatherings is the word, right? And so let's talk about that for a minute. It's not in the conditions right now but there are, in the code, there's a quiet time specified from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. So how well do you think that covers the request by the neighbors to have their peace between 10 p.m. and 9 a.m.? And I don't know if that's a fair question or an easy question to answer, but does that, it sounds like it's on the books that you're supposed to be quiet, at least quieter, down to 50 dB measured at some point. And I know when these enforcement things happen, there actually is a sound meter and you go and check it out, right? 50 dB is pretty quiet too. I've done acoustic stuff. So what can you say about that might satisfy or help the neighbors feel a little bit better about the timing of all this?
I would say that the current noise ordinance covers most of the quiet hours that the neighbors are looking to have. It does include an additional 2 hours until 9 a.m. instead of just 7 a.m. As what our code says. That is so enforceable by code enforcement and the police department as well, if let's say there is a noise violation. But as part of this use permit review, you can include more restrictive requirements that would require a more extended period of quiet hours as part of this review.
And we're talking then about the 7 a.m. to 9 a.m., which I don't think is that big of a deal, although I have been up there in the morning on St. Friday's Day, and things were still happening for sure. So is this the first one of these that we've seen in a while? Conditional use permit application for a fraternity?
I would say it's been a while. The last CUP that we processed was for a sorority in 2021, I believe.
Okay. And is this permit language modeled on that one?
Yes.
And I think similarly, whatever comes in the future, and I think we might hope that there will be more of these that are effectively fraternity houses already, but kind of under the radar and not really official, and therefore not subject to a use permit like this, might be modeled on this one as well. But if we don't make much change to the 2021 that this was modeled on, then we probably don't, that's not gonna make much difference, I suppose. Okay, so I've gone through my list. I've raised a number of things here. I'd like to invite my fellow commissioners here to, if they have any other questions of staff that might have come up as I've gone through, or as everybody's gone through all this.
I wouldn't mind hearing from the public, get speaker slips, and then we could discuss it, my preference would be, I think.
Okay, that's a good idea. Anything else? Well, okay. Then let's move on to public comment, and Deputy City Clerk, do we have any public comment on this item?
Yes, Vice Chair, we do. The first speaker is Kathy Walker, followed by Sandra Rowley.
Good evening.
Good evening. I hope you read my lengthy correspondence. I'm sorry for the length. I wanted to get everything out, and I really don't want to regurgitate what I've already said. Hopefully you saw the videos of the impact of the fraternity, and that's just one example of dozens. I do want to also say thank you for the fraternity actually applying for this use permit. I think that's a really important step. I talked to Hannah about how this use permit was modeled, and it was modeled after 2 use permits that were actually for sororities, one on 190 Stenner and one at 1328 Foothill. And there's a big difference between sororities and fraternities. Sororities aren't allowed to have alcohol. They're not allowed to have parties. The host have alcohol. They go to the fraternity houses for the parties or a third-party venue. So the impact is much greater from a fraternity house than a sorority house. Every other fraternity use permit in the city lists the hours of 10 p.m. to 9 a.m., every single one. So I think that having a departure from that is a mistake. I think that for them to be able to see that in black and white underscores the importance of that. He said that there aren't fraternity events in the neighborhood. I have photos of rush events at least 5 fraternity houses in our neighborhood that happened this year, so that's not exactly true. I also want to make a point that they said that the use permit expired in 2021. I have some questions about that because it expired after the sorority moved out, but that was during COVID. And once the COVID pandemic lifted, it was only 5 months before this fraternity started doing improvements on the property. So there really wasn't a year that passed of inactivity if you don't include the lockdown for the pandemic. I think that you should go back to the original use permit. The property at 1292 Foothill had a use permit. They expanded to pull in some properties from Crandall Way, and none of the conditions of their use permit changed except for the occupancy and the people that could be there at the meetings. That increased, but the other conditions of the use permit stayed in place. And I think that's important for this permit that I think Alan Cooper wrote to you how it would look if you kept the use conditions from the previous use permit. And I'm not sure if I have anything else to say. Just, it's hard to explain the impact. Oh, one other thing. This is a residential neighborhood. It is R4, but it's not an event venue. So when you're bringing in 100 people or 150 people, I can understand maybe once a year or twice a year, but to have it happening every other month is difficult. Our one neighborhood is closer to this fraternity house than Cal Poly is. So I just would like you to keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Who do we have next?
Sandra Rowley, and then Stephen Walker.
Hi, my name is Sandra Rowley, spelled phonetically for you. A couple of points. Unless there is a lot of police activity, SNAP does not respond to fraternities. It's a police response to fraternities. And at least up until now, Cal Poly has considered any house with the majority of members from that fraternity to be a satellite house. Whether we use that same definition or not is up in the air. The project is one lot, one permit, one entity. So it would seem proper that any code violation by any one of those entities would be considered a code violation by Lambda Chi Alpha at 1264 East Foothill, as opposed to one at Monte Vista, another at Monte Vista, et cetera. Regarding noise, Mr. Seimer has stated that the height of the structures will help keep the noise down, and he's confident in their ability to enhance the positive impact of the chapter on the surrounding community. We certainly hope so. But since the conditional use permit goes with the land, we also have to look at the future as well as the present. And so some of the things that are said are not just for the present, but therefore next year and 5 years from now, et cetera. And that seems to be something to keep in mind. As far as contact information for surrounding neighbors, many of our permanent neighbors will call someone at the site before they call the police. If they're not given that opportunity, then they don't have a chance to cut the noise back or turn the stereo down or whatever the difficulty is. So having that interchange between the fraternity members, who is the contact, giving phone numbers to residents so that they can be nice about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Walker's next.
Good evening. Forgive me, I got some hardware in my back that just recently got added. You know, all I have to say on this, just a couple of points. I would like to reemphasize that it is a residential area. It's high density, but nonetheless, it is a residential area. And that map doesn't really do it justice. If you just pan out a little bit, you'll see that the lower density residential area is fairly close there. I would like for you to consider adding the quiet hours. Now, why is that important? It needs to actually be in the document. You know, no one is going to go and research what is in the municipal code. You know, all the other things that are hidden in the municipal code. It needs to be available to the fraternity, what they can and can't do, you know, in their conditional use permit. I think that'll be helpful for them, and it would be helpful for the community at large. As far as the noise, being a neighbor, I can't emphasize to you how important those hours of operation are, because once the party is shut down, you know, it's not the noise from the party, it's the noise from the stragglers that leave the party. And those people are predominantly sorority people, because per the Pan-Hellenic Council, you know, per their rules, they're not allowed alcohol and they're not allowed doing parties. So where they're going to go? To the nearest fraternity house, whether that be a fraternity in its proper zone or a house in the neighborhood. You know, that's the reality. The city is behind the ball here. So you need to write these down. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. So the noise is the screaming, the shrieking, the howling, the whooping, you know, that goes on through to 1 o'clock in the morning until they reach their final destination. So that is the issue. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Chair, that was our last speaker.
Okay. Any more public comment? Last chance. Okay, so we can have another round of discussion up here. Any other questions, comments for either proponent or staff? Yes, Commissioner Hahn.
I have a general comment. I too went to Cal Poly, and I did go to parties during going to Cal Poly, and it was a good time. What we have here is two different uses. We have residential uses and we have fraternity houses. And what Berkeley does about it is there's a fraternity row, and all the fraternity houses, particular area, are on this row. And that's, I've been thinking about this for about a week since we got the agenda. That's really the way to solve it now. I don't expect that to be solved here because you have to buy property and everything would have to change, and it's probably not going to happen. I know that years and years ago there was discussion of a fraternity row and nothing ever came of it. So that's the perplexion to me, is how you do about it. And having gone to parties while I was going to college, parties just start at 10 o'clock. That's just when it gets rolling. I'm just trying to be honest here. It's the elephant in the room. And I don't have a fix. I would like to hear what other commissioners recommend, because I certainly understand the residences and wanting peace and quiet after 10 o'clock. I get that. I totally get it. And I, understand the college students and want to let a little steam off on a Friday or Saturday night and do their thing. So I don't have a solution. I'm just saying I would like to hear some recommended solutions from my fellow commissioners.
Thank you, Commissioner Khan. Commissioner Flores, what do you have for us?
I don't have a solution, but I have a question of staff. A couple of the speakers brought up about noise complaints. Are they tied to address or APN? And I think logically, maybe they're tied to address generally. But when you have one owner and one CUP covering one APN, I would hope in this case that the noise complaints apply to the whole parcel. Can you respond how a noise complaint would apply?
Yes, so when the police department does go out there and they issue a noise violation, it is attached to an address, but we can also trace that back to the property as well. So if, let's say, there are multiple residences, multiple addresses, but one property with one CUP, if, let's say, the front house and the rear house get violations individually, those would count as two instances of a violation. And so it would be traced back to the CUP for their fraternity or sorority.
So were you asking about satellite houses or about the 4 houses on this property?
Specifically about the 4 houses. And I also would imagine if there's a noise complaint and the keg's out in the parking lot, that complaint would go to all 4 addresses, or, if it's outside the house in the yard area.
I believe so. I'm not sure how the police department decides on the address when they issue the complaint. But, as long as there's documentation, it would be traced back to their CUP.
I'll just follow up on that. Having been up to the site and walked around, there's a pretty big central core area between all 4 houses, and that's probably the ground zero for the event or gathering. And I do have a question about this satellite house business, and I don't know if we're going to, I want to hear from some more of you before we try to tackle that. And I'm kind of wishing that we had a representative from the SLO PD here. That might have been helpful. I didn't even think of it, but no?
Yeah, that's not on the agenda tonight for discussion.
Okay.
Satellite,
Oh, I meant in general for responding to complaints of gatherings or special events at this site. I didn't mean that SLO PD specifically for the satellite house thing. So anyway, we don't have that. So onward through the haze. What do we have over here? Commissioner Jorgensen?
Well, I guess I was wondering whether it would be of any help to post signs, at least at the edge of the properties, where the public can see them, as to name and contact information, and also post the noise ordinance itself, or at least the hours, and have it there, both maybe on the site, but also at the edge of the site so that people coming and going at least know that there's neighborly and city interest in this, and whether that would be of any help at all as part of trying to make this all work a little better.
Commissioner Tully.
Yeah, could staff walk me through how, in lieu of having police representation, can staff walk us through, for the record, how code enforcement works? First off, do they work outside of city office hours? Is there an evening enforcement? At the city. For the city, yeah.
Planning committee, like the community development's not staffed at night, right?
No, but they, so they work normal office hours
Okay.
and they respond to police reports and complaints that get forwarded to them for follow-up. They do go out in certain instances and do night patrols or do check different use permit requirements. For instance, if there's a live entertainment permit at a downtown bar, they might pick a night and go do a compliance check on that. But that's not the norm.
Okay. And what, how does code enforcement, like, okay, first violation, second violation, like how does the violations tack up? Like how do they accumulate, and then what's the repercussions for multiple violations?
So it depends on what the violation is. So for instance, if it's a noise violation, they get a notice of violation that this was reported and that they need to correct. In a case where there's a use permit and there's a threshold issue or a substantiated, in this case, a condition where a police officer goes out, writes a report, noise violation, that goes to code enforcement, then that would go to community development. Obviously, we're all together there. And then there's consideration on what to do next, right? So first we make contact with the applicant or the property owner, talk through what the issue is, and then set different, I guess, performance standards moving forward. And those have a range of, checkpoints and potentially ultimately could go to fines and then go from there to back to the planning commission for potential revocation of the permit.
Got it. So it sounds like it's a case-by-case basis. Okay. Hannah, has this project, and I'm assuming it has, but for the record, has this project been referred to Slow Fire for review and approval?
Yes, as part of the CUP review,
Yeah.
Slow Fire was included, and there weren't any conditions.
Cool. And so did I read this right, that the neighborhood relations plan, they need to establish one? Is that right? A neighborhood relations plan? Did I get that right?
As of right now, the drafted conditions don't include a neighborhood relations plan.
Got it.
That was often brought up in, as part of the correspondence for this item, to include it as a condition.
Okay, because where I was going with that was if they are required to have a neighborhood relations plan, what becomes of that? Yes, we have it on file, I'm assuming, but do the neighbors, is it distributed to neighbors? Like how do the neighbors have contact information for the occupants, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at.
If that's something that the commission would want to pursue as a condition of this project, you can provide staff with direction as to what you would like to have included as part of that plan. As of right now, we don't have anything specific that would set the parameters for that program. In prior approvals, there was mention of trainings and neighborhood outreach. But if you wanted to include that as a condition, it would be helpful to further define what trainings would entail and sort of the notification buffers.
And I'll just add, I think where Hannah left off there with kind of a notification buffer, I think in terms of whether it's a formal plan or whether if it's just contact information to neighbors and occupants within so many feet of the site, that's another way that you could look at it as well.
Well, I think fellow commissioners, the last CUP for this came before us, if I heard correctly, in 2021. Is that right, Hannah? So I think we have a opportunity to kind of, set a new precedent, I guess, when it comes to future. And apparently I wasn't aware of how many unofficial frat houses there are out there, but it seems common sense for me anyway to have some sort of neighborhood notification for special events that includes amplified music or live music, and also some type of a notification to neighbors with contact information for nuisances, so it doesn't have to become a code enforcement issue or a police issue. So I think that's something that we can discuss amongst ourselves, but that's pretty much all I have.
Tommy, you kind of raised your hand when this issue came up. Did you have something to add about that?
Yeah. At the beginning of my presidency, I took it upon myself, because I know some of our neighbors had a less than favorable opinion of us. So I took it upon myself to write each of them a letter, my phone number, name, contact information. And so I would assume that they all retained that. And if they had ongoing issues about what we're doing at our residence, they would call me. So I just wanted to, I do agree with you that a formally stated plan is a good idea, but I just wanted to note that.
And that's appreciated. That's great. It's just a matter of if us codifying it. You did that out of the goodness of your heart, but if we were able to condition that, that could be potentially a precedent moving forward for not only you, but others.
100%.
So, okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, that seems to be an important point, and I don't know exactly how we would write that into the CUP language at this point.
I have one more thing.
Oh, do you want to?
Well,
Okay.
I was just going to ask, Hannah, can you put up on the screen the conditions? Can we go over the conditions real quick, just to review them together?
And while you're pulling that up, I'm thinking, I appreciated the comment from that you try to contact the fraternity first before calling the cops. Did you, by show of hands, did you receive this letter that Mr. Simer just mentioned? Did that get as far as your mailboxes? Okay.
One of my friends does live in the area, and she takes it on herself to go to some of the houses and pass out a flyer.
Uh-huh.
Says these are the noise things that you need to worry about.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, she asks for a phone number or 2 or 3 or 4.
Tom?
Commissioner Houghton, I just want to, it's Markey,
Okay.
Assistant City Attorney. Technically, public comment has been closed, so if
Okay.
you're wishing to reopen public comment, I just want to get that on the record and make sure that there is an opportunity for all to speak who would like to speak.
Thanks. I was kind of looking for an informal show of hands, like, did that work? But I guess we can't do that easily, can we? Okay. I had another question about fines. I live kind of near Cal Poly, and the word came around, I don't know, 6-7 years ago, that there was a new fine structure, and first offense was, as I recall, $900, and second offense was, it went up significantly from there. What do we know? Did I just remember that optimistically, or what's the deal with that?
I can speak on that to some extent. So I'm guessing the information you heard was that there was a safety enhancement zone in place, and that the police department puts that in place during certain times of the year. I think historically, or at least for the last few years, they've done that around St. Patrick's Day. And what that means is that if there are certain violations of specified sections of our code, the administrative citation fee is increased, and it can be quite expensive, like you're saying. But outside of a safety enhancement zone, it is not that steep. I have the council's resolution up right now that, absent a more specific penalty or fine in the code for a specific violation, a violation of our municipal code. The first violation is $100. For a second violation of the same code section within 12 months, that administrative fine shall be the sum of $500. And then a third violation of that same code within 12 months goes up to $1,000.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, I think that squares up with what I remember now, the safety enhancement zone, and that's typically Halloween and St. Patrick's. Right?
I don't know the specific times
Okay.
throughout the year, but I know for sure St. Patrick's Day.
Okay. And Hannah, were you able to bring that up? And we had the request to kind of review the conditions. And maybe while we do that, I appreciated Mr. Walker's comment that even though in the municipal code, there's this quiet hour thing, it's unlikely that that's going to be close at hand, and the CUP is going to be the thing that's easier to access and refer to. And perhaps it's a good thing to have the quiet hours mentioned directly in that. So that's one of the things that I think that we might be interested in tacking onto this thing. And I also had the question about sorority or satellite houses. I don't know how we would handle that under this situation. If that's going to be a municipal code thing versus this permit. This permit application is specific to this property, so I'm not sure that's in our purview at this time. But it sounds like that's a significant issue too. So I guess my question then is it reason, how could we add this 10 to 9 a.m. as proposed by the public, by the neighbors, into the CUP?
I have some draft language that I can go ahead and include as part of the resolution here. I'll go ahead and type it in track changes if you'd like to review it.
That sounds great.
If I could just comment, Alan Cooper sent a public comment, and he's got a marked up conditions of approval, amending our conditions of approval that have some good wording in them.
So if we're going to consider that, then we need to review, just part of it, or just one piece, or just the 10 and 9 piece? Because that went on for several pages.
Yeah, 10 and 9. Let's see.
And so while we're scratching at that, are there any other proposed conditions that the commission might like to tack on to this? I know Commissioner Tully, you were talking about something with contact information. That's going to be a changing target, right? Tommy's not going to be there forever, so who's it going to be? I was kind of thinking of, well, could you have some signage out somewhere, or even a QR code that you scan? I don't know if that's going to work for the neighbors, but some way to make it relatively easy to find out who to contact.
Could it be a requirement of the CUP to register with the city every year and provide that information at least to the city, and then the neighbors could obtain it from there?
That's already in there,
Okay.
right? And the problem
Contacts.
is at 11 p.m. when it's rowdy,
Yeah.
you can't call the city to get that. But I would imagine the neighbors probably are aware of, I mean, maybe you keep your own little black book of numbers. And so that is available to you. Because by calling the city, but I don't know if everybody, I mean, we have some of you are in this room, not everybody, some might be watching on TV, but I don't know if everybody knows to do that. So if there's another way, another mechanism that would make it easier for that contact information to be available, I guess we're all ears for that.
I know for construction,
Tommy, do you have an idea?
The Fraternity and Sorority Life Office at Cal Poly keeps a master list of all the officers for each organization, and as far as I know, that's public information. And I'm sure if you reached out to the director of the office, she's very kind. She'd be more than willing to provide that to you guys every year. I'm pretty sure of it.
Is that published on a website or anything?
Yeah, I think it's on calpolyfsl.com, as far as I know.
Okay. That's a good step. Any other ideas? Besides a big billboard with your phone number on it? Okay, it looks like we have some draft language in red here. Can you folks read that? I can read it. No meetings, parties, or other types of similar activities are allowed between the hours of 10 p.m. and 9 a.m., except as approved as a special event by the Community Development Director. So how is that going to work for enforcement? Will that trigger this 50 decibel measurement criteria that's already in the code?
So as drafted, this condition would require just quiet hours on a regular basis unless there is a larger event where there is, anticipated increased noise levels. And that would need to be reviewed and approved by the community development director.
Okay, so in that case, if we were to add this and then take a motion second approve this, then it would go through one more level of review within the city
Yes.
to make sure that it's feasible. How do you guys feel about this language? Any comments?
I have a comment. Hannah answered earlier that a special event does not warrant notification to neighbors. That's my only concern. That doesn't trigger any type of communication to the neighbors. So, I mean, again, at 11:30 at night when it's getting rowdy on a Tuesday, I'm worried about how anyone's going to be able to contact, even if they do register by a special event and is approved by the community development director. So I guess my suggestion would be to keep this number 14 how it's written and perhaps add another condition or amend an existing one talking about a neighborhood compatibility plan, relations plan. I mean, the valid point, Chair, about, a moving target, that the contact information will change. So maybe a centralized, somehow or other, a centralized phone number or contact information, I think it would be nice to add. I mean, even Mr. Tommy, the president, suggested and indicated that was a good idea. So something to think about.
So I'm trying to think about how we turn that into language that could be useful.
Well, I think the exact language, staff can work on that and have that in the final resolution. I think if we can hear from the commission, if there's majority that would like contact information to be provided to neighbors with some parameters around that, we can refine that language and include that. We don't need exact language.
Okay, thanks. Does anybody have any opposition to either that or this point 14 that Hannah's just drafted up?
No, I like that idea. Does this go to city council for final approval? Or are we the final word?
You're the final
Okay, I didn't know.
authority.
Thank you.
Okay, so we need some approximate language then on notification of neighbors in the event of a special event. Commissioner Khan, did you see anything in Cooper's letter that hit that?
What he said, which I don't necessarily agree with, I'll just read it. It's item 15. It says the applicant shall institute and maintain a neighborhood relations program. This plan shall indicate at least two of the following elements: annual training for all members of the community relations. So that begs the question, who's doing the training? Who's going to, hold it? When is it held? Who's going to be there? So that's kind of a...
Second one seems better.
A program to inform neighbors of upcoming events at the house. Evidence of implementation of said plan shall be submitted to the director for review each year. Failure to exercise reasonable efforts to implement said plan may be grounds for revocation of permit. Events, including meetings and parties on site, should be limited to those listed on a meeting and activity schedule submitted to the city approval. Development director each fall, or to the community development director each fall of the year. The community director must approve exceptions to this schedule. And then, if the director determines the changes is significant and may have adverse impact on the neighborhood, then it will be referred to the planning commission for consideration.
I think the part that we're really interested in is the first part of that, right, with the neighborhood notification.
One thing I really want is it to be doable. you know, it to be something that can be implemented and can be followed fairly
Yeah.
easily and be doable and be attainable. I do have an idea because I think we're kind of grasping for straws, and I'd like to ask staff what they think about this idea. They've heard our concerns about a neighborhood relations program and about hours of quiet. And also I saw something in here about if you have 4 strikes against you, you have to come back before the planning commission and have your permit renewed. Is that I'm just throwing it out there for discussion, we continue this item and give staff, however long they need to craft language and then come back with something that they think is enforceable and doable and reasonable.
I might also recommend, if there's a majority consensus on what you'd like to see in terms of notification, we could also take a brief recess, and myself, Tyler, and Hannah could go draft some language and bring it back to you and the public for consideration, but that gives us the opportunity to not draft on the fly, but we will need the direction from you of what you'd like to see.
Seems like the 2 items that we're really interested in are the addition of the timing and this neighborhood notification contact information.
And perhaps some sort of teeth to it that if you get more than a certain amount of strikes against you, you got to come back to the planning commission for
I think that's
renewing.
already in there.
Yeah, I do want to point out that condition 3 already says that basically any written or substantiated complaint received by the city from a member of the public, the community development department, the police department, that evidences a violation of the use permit or any city code shall be reviewed by the planning commission.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, okay, if we did take the break, would we want to hear the next item while you were on a break, and we could listen to the...
I need to be here.
Yeah, they need to
That's right,
staff us
yeah.
for that anyway,
Good
so,
job.
okay. Then let's, how do you guys feel about that? Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, I think it's reasonable. I still want to say one other thing, trying
Yeah.
to look ahead. One of the members of who testified said we've got to look a few years ahead. It would be nice in the longer run if we saw this as a neighborhood that interacted with each other, and I can imagine kiosks, just like we have at City Hall, where all the minutes and notes of every agenda item are there. You can read them. You can't write your own kind of thing there, but it would be nice if neighbors could post notes. Well, there was a bunch of people at midnight the other day doing this, but even a map of where all the fraternities and sororities are, and a chance to post neighborhood relations plans and post special events that are coming up, so that it isn't a hidden kind of thing and just in the city core, City Hall locks up at 5 o'clock, but that's something everybody's proud of and is doing the right way as best we can, and it becomes part of a public dialogue in a way. I wish we could eventually move to something that's a little friendlier and encourage more back and forth, so it isn't just between City Hall and the fraternity somehow. Let's leave it at that.
That sounds like a lovely idea. We need to.
Not in our lifetime.
And I also appreciate what Commissioner Khan is saying about it. This needs to be doable, and this should be something that doesn't discourage other applicants from going through this process, because this is the way it should work, right? So with that, why don't we take the recommendation for a brief recess? Is there anything else I need to?
Yeah, I just want to, before we break, I want to clarify that there's majority will for us to craft conditions, one about essentially the quiet hours being from 10 p.m. to 9 a.m. except as otherwise approved by this community development department as a special event. And then you're looking for some sort of requirement for the fraternity to provide notification to nearby residents within a certain buffer. Is there any direction on what that buffer might be, or are you looking to staff's kind of
And that was
experience
for
on that?
special events, right?
Yeah, for
Because
special
gatherings that
right.
we can't be expected that those are going to be
Correct.
anticipated,
It
scheduled.
would be the special events that have been approved, of more than 48 people that have been approved by the community development
Do we have
director.
any other experience in a radius kind of a situation here?
Sure. So I would default probably to our normal notification for like public hearing items such as this, which is 300 feet. That's a pretty significant net that I would recommend if I was going to offer that. I would offer the 300-foot buffer as a reasonable notification buffer for a special event, because that's what our notification buffer is, or requirement is for our special event permits.
Okay.
The second question I have is, if we go back to is there something more that you're looking for on the quiet hour condition, or was there more? Just,
I was going to suggest for the quiet hours condition, language about enforcement and code enforcement, some type of language like as per city code, quiet hours, da-da-da-da-da, so it kind of ties back to code enforcement.
City code says to 7 a.m., so we have that issue. But enforcement is kind of a separate thing. I mean, enforcement applies to any of these conditions, right?
I think I understand the comment from Commissioner
Right,
Tolley.
and I think we'll put our heads together, because what I'm hearing from both the public and the commission is that the concern is noise, and as drafted, there are potential associational issues that I see, and it's getting a little bit broader than the concern we're actually trying to address. So we will work on language that is really geared towards the noise issue between those hours and bring that back for your review.
I'm just worried that number 14, how it's preliminarily drafted, is only applying to special events that were applied to the community development director. Because wouldn't that apply to all the time? The quiet time.
That's the way it's written, except as approved as a special event.
Oh, okay.
No meetings, parties, or other types of activity. That covers it,
Okay.
right?
Yeah, you can't have more than 48 people unless you have a special event. One thing is, if the noise ordinance ends at 7 a.m., I would have no problem trying to make them tie together and make it be 7 a.m. because, I mean, most parties are over by 7 a.m. anyway. So if it makes it all tie together better, let's keep them consistent.
It's already the code, so
Yeah.
I would say if what you're looking for is the code, which is 10 to 7, then that's the code. If you're looking for more, then this gives you 2 more hours to 9 a.m.
Okay, well, I'm just throwing it out there that I'm trying to make it work. So if it works better with matching the code, then so that doesn't, okay, that's fine.
We wouldn't need a condition if we're not going beyond the code.
Oh, okay.
Except for Mr. Walker's comment that it's useful to have this in the conditional use permit,
Right.
not just in the code. So,
Right, I mean, it would basically put the fraternity on specific notice, but they would
Yeah.
otherwise still be responsible for understanding what's in our code. But to Mr. Walker's point, it would point them directly to
well, and the
code
fact
provision.
that it's 9 a.m. instead of 7 kind of gives us a real reason to put it in there too, so.
Well, certainly if it is 9 a.m., then we need to
Yeah.
include it in the code.
So addressing your interest in kind of a straw poll here, is anybody opposed to taking this recess and going forward with this, with these
May I
two
also
items?
add one more point of clarification?
Sure.
When you asked earlier about the administrative citation fines, I explained that there are certain fines associated with general violations of our code. And Ms. Rowley, did I say that right? Pointed out that there are different fines associated with noise specifically, which is consistent with my understanding, but I didn't know the exact amounts, and so I have those now. The first violation is $350, second 700, and third is 1,000. So I just wanted to clarify that for you, and thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Okay.
One more suggestion.
Yes.
Okay, so for number 15, when we talk about the notification, a lot of the correspondences that we received and that we read talked a lot about, and even today, talked about pedestrians in relation to neighborhood parties or attendees or anything. So I was just going to suggest notification 300 feet. I mean, I'll take it as a compromise. I would like a higher radius personally, but also I wanted to add maybe everyone on the street, everyone on the same street as the residents, only because, you know, if people are going to be biking and driving and walking after hours and before, you know, to and from, I just think that that's something to consider.
I don't know about that, Commissioner Tully, just because that's going to be kind of a little bit arbitrary and vague. If it's a long street, could go all the way down the street. And also, once people are on the city streets, it's no longer Lambda Chi's deal, and it's a neighborhood thing in general. I mean, I see why you're interested in that, but I think it's problematic. So, so with that, I think, are we ready to take what do you need, Markey, 5, 10 minutes?
You're saying 5? Between 5 and 10?
5 minutes flexibly.
Okay.
Okay, so I will declare us in recess. Do I need to bang this thing?
I think that means the meeting would be adjourned, so
No.
maybe don't do that.
Won't do that? Okay, so we are in recess for 5 to 10 minutes. All right, welcome back, everybody. We are out of recess. So we now should have some new language. I'll give Hannah a moment to try to put that up on the screen, addressing the hours of quietude and neighborhood contact planning. Okay, take us through this, if you would, Hannah.
All right, so we did take a look at both conditions again, both drafted conditions again. Condition number 14 has been revised to more clearly refer back to our noise ordinance. And so that'll be specific to noise levels in this section for the R4 zone. And so as of right now, it would be a noise level about 50 dBA. And so this was intended to capture whether or not this table would be updated in the future.
And that 50 dBA, that's at a certain distance or a certain point of measurement, right? That's all specified in there?
It'll be at the property line.
Okay. And I see the word extended, so that refers to the fact that it goes a little bit longer.
Yes.
Okay.
Can I just wordsmith one thing? And condition 14, except as approved in writing as a special event. Just to add the words in writing.
That's the only way it can be approved, right?
Yeah, I know, but yeah.
Okay.
He told me it would be good.
Okay. Okay. How's number 14 sound to everybody? Any issues with that? I can't reopen public comment without reopening public comment, but if you guys want to nod that looks pretty good, then
The attorney's leaving, you don't want to straight to
okay. Okay, how about number 15? Let's take a look at that.
And then number 15 ties back to condition number 5, which requires that the fraternity receive approval from the community development director if they're looking to host a special event over the 48 people threshold. And so if they are looking to host that event, the fraternity shall provide written notification of the event to occupants within 300 feet of the site. The written notification shall include the date, hours, and contact information for the responsible party of that event.
Love it.
I might see, you have the word occupants within 300, maybe residents? Yeah. Does that make more sense?
It doesn't for our purposes of notification.
Okay.
Yeah, we usually notice occupants and owners, and so.
Okay.
Owners in this case, it's just occupants covers it all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. And I would ask our proponent to nod if that seems reasonable or doable. Number 15. Yeah. Okay, I heard yeah. All right. Okay, So we have our additional language, additional conditions here, and unless there's more discussion items, then I'd be ready to, oh, where'd she go? Okay. We missed you. Anything we need to know about?
I think there is question about the meaning of condition 14, specifically whether it is suggesting that these special events that are approved by the community development director pursuant to, I think, what is it, condition 5, would essentially be authorizing violation of the city's noise ordinance. And, you know, I'll defer to Tyler and Hannah on what the community development director would be considering when reviewing these requests for special events. But my understanding is that there could be, like other special events throughout the city, you know, we have music festivals that don't comply with our noise ordinance. So there are situations in which there can be special grants to not comply with our noise ordinance or other code requirements. That said, you know, I won't be reviewing those event applications, and I don't know that the community development director is going to every single time allow that. I don't know what goes into that consideration, but that was a concern raised.
Is it fair to say that special event permits would include their own criteria for noise and time and that sort of thing?
That's correct. That's how those special events work. They operate outside of our normal code requirements, and so that's why they're called special events, and they might have times when noise might exceed the local municipal code standard. They may have other things that are happening that are not normally allowed in that zone, and so that's the purpose of the event, to be able to put some conditions around it to understand what's happening, to provide the notification to the community and neighborhood, all those factors.
Okay, so it will have its own criteria for compliance and enforcement. I can see how one might read that as a open door to violating, but I don't really see it that way because the special event permit would have its own requirements. So, but thanks.
May I also clarify one other point that was brought up is that, you know, clearly we did revise the language that has been in previous CUPs from years ago. I wasn't here when those were drafted. I don't know that anyone from staff were. But I do want to note that there has been an evolution in our code language that says conditions may not be imposed that restrict the use to a specific person or group. So that's why I removed the language about no meetings or gatherings occurring, because we can't regulate who is in your house at certain times. And I was trying to focus specifically on the issue of noise. So that's why the change occurred.
Thank you. That makes sense. Okay. So you're okay with the language that we have here, since you wrote it?
Yes, I'm okay with it. And, you know, I appreciate the concern raised. But as Tyler said, that is consistent with what special events are throughout the city. And it will be reviewed on a case-by-case basis by the community development director.
Right. Okay. Commissioners, how are you feeling about ours 14 and 15? Any issues?
I think it's fine. I'm happy.
Around the horn? Okay. And where's my, I think we're ready for a motion.
I will move that we approve a requested use permit to establish a fraternity for up to 24 residents, including request to provide 2 parking spaces in tandem and an existing driveway along East Foothill, and with the amended conditions presented before us tonight.
Second, anyone? Okay, seconded by Commissioner Jorgensen. I like having one more opportunity for any discussion after we have the motion and second, so I will offer that to our commissioners. Anything else? And hearing none, can we have a roll call? Deputy City Clerk?
Commissioner Khan?
Yes.
Commissioner Jorgensen?
Yes.
Commissioner Flores?
Yes.
Commissioner Tully?
Yes.
Vice Chair Houghton?
Yes.
And that motion passes.
Congratulations, Tommy. You're in business. Thank you for all the comment. Thank you for all the written comment and for coming down tonight. Okay, we will move on to item number 4B. The public hearing item before us is to review text amendments to the zoning regulations. And once again, we have Associate Planner Hannah Hahn to present the report.
Thank you. Tonight's second hearing is a request initiated by the city for a text amendment affecting the CN zone. The scope of this text amendment is to add residential uses as conditionally allowable uses in the CN zone. As shown in the table above, the current use regulations do not identify single-family or multifamily uses as allowable in the CN zone. Staff is recommending that these uses now be allowed, subject to minor use permit approval as shown in the table below. This amendment would reintroduce residential uses as conditionally allowable in the CN zone. Since at least 1981 and until the comprehensive update to the zoning regulations in 2018, residential uses were previously allowed with minor use permit approval. As part of the comprehensive update in 2018, residential uses were removed from the list of allowable uses for the CN zone. It is unclear whether or not the removal in 2018 was intentional or an oversight. Staff could not find a direct discussion in the staff report, presentations, or minutes. However, we have received a recent interest to allow residential uses. This would allow for flexibility in the development potential and use of these parcels. This amendment would have minimal effect on overall development throughout the city, as there is a limited number of CN zoned properties. I want to make note that there are CN zone properties in the San Luis Ranch and Avila Ranch developments. However, those are separately regulated by their respective approvals. So the following slides will include the parcels that would be more directly affected. Most CN zone properties are primarily located along the Broad Street corridor between Church Street and Alfonso Street. These are developed properties with existing non-conforming residences, personal service, restaurants, general retail, and commercial recreation uses. There are also a few other outliers located elsewhere in the city. Here are two parcels at the intersection of Broad and Lincoln. These are developed properties with an existing restaurant and mixed-use property. Other outliers include 4 parcels along California between Hathaway and Highway 101. These are developed properties with existing restaurant, personal service, general retail, and convenience store uses. And lastly, there are 3 parcels in the CN zone along Laurel Lane between Augusta and Southwood. Again, these are also developed properties with existing restaurants, commercial recreation, personal service, and general retail uses. The purpose of both the neighborhood commercial land use designation and zone are intended to accommodate the provision of small-scale, pedestrian-oriented, and low-impact goods and services that would serve their surrounding residential areas. These zones are located either adjacent to or in proximity to other residential zones, and as such have a limited range in commercial uses that would be complementary, as they would be dependent on these nearby residences. Due to changes in how daily goods and services are procured in the last few decades, staff is recommending that residential uses be reintroduced as conditionally allowable with a minor use permit. This would provide just additional flexibility in the development and use of these parcels. And as proposed, the amendment would allow residential uses and would therefore be compatible with neighboring neighborhood service commercial uses and residences as well. As part of the review, staff finds that this text amendment would be exempt from environmental review under section 15061B3 of the CEQA guidelines. The text amendment would allow residential development within the CN zone with a minor use permit approval. Since discretionary review would be required, environmental review would be included as part of each application review, and each project would be evaluated on an individual basis. To conclude, it is staff's recommendation that the Planning Commission adopt the draft resolution recommending that the City Council introduce and adopt an ordinance amending specifically Table 2-1, uses allowed in Title 17, the zoning regulations of the municipal code, to add single-family and multifamily uses as conditionally allowed with approval of minor use permit in the CN zone. That concludes my presentation.
Okay, thank you, Anna. So time for us to have questions. Before that, do we have any yellow cards for this topic, Megan? Here comes one.
I see one coming up.
Okay, and we'll do that in just a minute. And I just kind of wanted to preview that to know what's coming. So questions for staff from the commission? Commissioner Jorgensen.
Yeah, Hannah, I wanted to ask, really following Sandra Rowley's question about whether in the neighborhood commercial zone, whether there still are setback size and scale that relate to the neighborhood. Are there conditions that still create that opportunity, or do they go by the wayside in this situation?
If a property owner were to pursue a residential development for a CN zone site, with this amendment, if let's say an apartment building is proposed, they would still need to meet the development standards of the CN zone. And so those do look very similar to, I would say, the R2 and R3 zones. There's a similar height requirement. Setbacks are a tad more lenient. However, we do have parameters in place that would guide the development, specifically parking, I would say setbacks, height, and coverage.
I see. So it may be in the examples that she cited, like say at Taft in Kentucky, that the underlying zoning really allowed for a multi-story building in that location, even if a lot of the neighborhood was still one story.
Yes.
Reminds me of the tourist commercial a few blocks away from there that off of Santa Rosa that allowed a much bigger building than the neighbors were expecting. Thank you.
Nothing to my right, nothing else to my left. I have a few questions myself. The first thing I tripped over on this was CN versus NC. NC is for the land use designation and CN is for zoning. Was that intentional that we did it that way? To kind of keep us on our toes, or?
I'm not sure about why those were flipped.
Okay, okay. I guess so. So I had a similar question to what Commissioner Jorgensen had about the heights, and if somehow this would be opening the door for larger buildings, and the example of 22 Churro, which has a nominal, has the cookie place downstairs, but the rest of it's all residential. But that would have had to comply with the zoning. What was that zone before? Was that CN? Or no, it was CC, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, right, and that's a different matter altogether, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then this seems like something I should already know, but minor use permit, that goes through staff approval, but not to this commission?
Yes, that's a staff level use permit.
Okay. And then I tried to think of reasons why this wouldn't be a good idea. And when you said it wasn't sure if it was intentional or oversight, I'm kind of going with oversight because of it doesn't really make a lot of sense. But then I thought about, I grew up partly in San Francisco, and in San Francisco, there are these neighborhood bodegas that it's really quite convenient and wonderful that, really in a residential block or two, there's a little grocery store that's got great stuff. And if that gets, because residential values, especially since the pandemic, have kind of outstripped commercial values in many ways, that if some of those get lost, some of those commercial spaces get lost to residences, you might not get them back, and it might be a problem. And then I imagine like Lucy's Coffee on Laurel getting turned into somebody's trophy home or something. I don't know. That was the only thing I could come up with that maybe argued against correcting this, perhaps oversight. So with that, that's all the comment I have, and I'd like to hear from the public, and unless there's anything else from, okay. So Deputy City Clerk, do we have public comment on this item?
Okay, the first comment card that I received was Sandra Rowley, and then Tony Dents.
Okay, Ms. Rowley, we all know how to say your name properly now?
I just did that because there was a thing that said you do this phonetically,
Right.
and I did it phonetically, and it was still wrong.
We like to get it right,
Yeah.
if we can. Okay, your 3 minutes is starting now.
Listening to the discussion, very hard to hear when the planner is looking at you and speaking that way. So I didn't catch all of it.
It's hard for you to hear what she's saying into the microphone?
It's hard to hear. She speaks quickly,
Okay.
and it was hard to hear even in the microphone.
I'll ask you to speak into the microphone as well.
No problem.
Thanks.
Obviously, you've all looked at the examples. Tafton, Kentucky, 22 Choro, 790 Foothill. I'm concerned of what's involved in a minor use permit. If there is any resident in participation in that, noticing, is there any noticing at all? Or is it just is it noticing as in the 300 feet? Or is it noticing as in a little thing in the New Times that hopefully you read at the right time? Or is there no noticing? Is it a check off?
I don't want to take your time to answer that, but we'll address that.
Okay. I would personally like to know exactly what the CN standards are. Not, yeah, there's some difference in setbacks, but it's not the same as a community commercial. I'd like to know exactly what residential neighborhoods in R1 and R2 might have to expect if somebody comes in to develop that property. If it's allowed to be X high, if it's allowed to be whatever. If the setback is 2 inches from the sidewalk as opposed to a setback that would be normal for that particular zone.
If it were R1, R2.
Yeah. The neighborhood commercials primarily are in R1, R2. And those are the ones that I find very concerning because I've seen what can happen to an R1 or an R2 prop area with the community commercial. And it just seems like if whatever the maximum allowable is, that's what the developer will put on the property. So let's find out what's the max, and are there conditions that can be placed so that to rectify any of that?
Okay, thanks.
you.
If I understand you correctly, you're asking about the noticing of the minor use permit, how does that work, and then exactly what these standards are. So thank you. And can I ask our staff to respond to that?
Yes, so to clarify, for minor use permits, there is a notification requirement prior to a hearing. And so we notice 7 days as a legal ad in the newspaper, and also 7 days as postcards to owners and occupants within 100 feet of the project site.
100 feet.
Yes.
What happened to our 300 feet?
That's for the planning commission. It's also, with the noticing, it's actually in practice 10 days, because we notice all
Okay.
of our hearings on the same day, 10 days in advance, even though the minimum is 7, it's always 10.
Okay, and then, so there's our noticing requirement as it's currently written. And then the second point was, I think the point was, if residential happens in a CN zone, what greater latitude do they have compared to R1, R2, in terms of setbacks, height? And maybe that's a little bit more detailed than you have at your fingertips, but take a stab at it if you could.
So if somebody is proposing residential in the CN zone, they are allowed to do 12 units per net acre. And so it just depends on the lot size of that development. In terms of setbacks, it would be a front setback of 10 feet, a max building height of 35 feet, maximum lot coverage of 75%, with the floor area ratio being a maximum of 2.0 for the site. I also wanted to highlight that side and rear setbacks at a minimum of 5 feet would be required as well. As the building gets higher, there would be increased building height as well. I know that there was a concern brought up as to how, these potential developments may impact their neighboring R1 and R2 zoned properties that may be nearby. There are edge conditions built into our code that require greater setback as well.
Okay. That's a lot to consume, but
I would say to consider that against what does the R2 allow? It's same density, it's the same height. The difference is a front setback of 20 in the R2, 10 in the CN.
okay, those are the major differences between CN and R2. R1 is obviously a different animal. It's got greater setbacks, lower FAR, et cetera, right?
I mean, it's 25-foot height limit in the R1, it's 20-foot setback in the
Yeah.
front.
Okay.
40% FAR.
Okay, I think we've addressed that. We have another public comment that's lined up.
Yes, Ms. Debs?
Does it automatically start? Oh, yeah, it does.
You can bend it up. There you go.
Thank you. My name is Tony Detz, and I live in a CN, otherwise neighborhood commercial zone. We're in favor of this, and I just want to address that everything is not a development and a developer. Some things are that a person purchased a residence, it looks like a residence, it feels like a residence, all the building footprint, everything's the same. They ran a business out of it with permits. They went through planning. It changed to commercial use. There was nothing necessarily in place other than the minor use permit to go back to residential. Whether or not someone knew that or not, that was the case. There wasn't the rule that currently exists, which now states you can't ever go back to residential. So in the case of what I'm speaking of, it looks like a residence. All the pictures show it all throughout the years. You could barely see a commercial sign. And in this case, we would like to go back to being a residence, and we were told, no, you can't. So it's a different scenario, and possibly you want to address that or you don't want to address that. We're not trying to change to R2. It was, in our instance, R1. We think the process for especially something like that should be simple, it should be quick, it should be inexpensive, and it should be able to happen. If I were now trying to make it a development, I would understand more would be involved. Does anyone have any questions for me?
I think you said it well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other public comment?
No, we do not.
Okay, Commission, do we have any comments following the public comments? I'll start on my right here. Nope. On to my left.
I still have some questions as staff, I think.
Yeah, bring it.
Just to get these out there, going back to the first topic, which was notice and all of that. For the minor permits, is the application posted on the site as well? So anybody walking by would see it in that. Thank you. And secondly, back to the last speaker's question, what's going on with the inability to reconvert, so to speak, to residential? What am I missing about? What do I need to understand how that works?
Sounds like it's just the language in the code.
I can't remember that coming up quite that way, going through the whole zoning ordinance that only worked in one direction. I'm trying to figure out what's involved there.
That's what we're here trying to fix.
Yeah, well, maybe, but Tyler?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so the concern was raised that, that the particular structure is being used as in a commercial way, and they want to take it back to a residential use and are not able to. And why is that?
That has to do with our non-conforming use regulations. So once you change, so prior to the change in 2018, they could go from residential, which a lot of the CN zones historically are always residential. And we came in and said, hey, let's provide some commercial where residents can walk within ideally a quarter mile of where they live. And so we identified some areas of the city, thought this would be a good idea. This has happened back, I think, in the 80s or so. And so these are all historically residential, mostly residential areas. And so you have these structures that some are historic, and now some of them have transitioned into commercial uses, office uses and others, services. And then this change happened with our 2018 update that took away the ability to convert it back through a minor use permit process. So it left these properties in a situation where, since they changed it and got a building permit to do that to commercial, they don't have the ability to go back. And so what we're saying is, hey, this seems to make some sense. They're developed, a lot of them, as original residential uses. Sometimes commercial ventures fail. There may be better and higher uses for the site. Housing is obviously a priority and a crisis in the city. Let's provide an opportunity and have a case-by-case review of whether this is appropriate.
So like High Street Deli, for example, is that CN or how did that work?
That is CN.
Yeah, okay. And Lincoln Deli also. Well, that's one of the ones that showed up in the map there. Okay. Right. And I also think of the attorney offices on Marsh Street in those old houses and places like that, right? And on Higuera. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I just didn't, I read this and that wasn't what popped into my head. Good, thank you.
Do we have any other comments? The only one I have, did you, Commissioner Flores?
Well, the one speaker brought up about even getting a minor use permit was an extra step, and should that be required? So I didn't know if there should be some discussion of that.
What do we think about that? The minor use permit is a staff level review, and I guess on the face of it, I would think that's not unreasonable, but do we have any other thoughts on that?
I mean, I agree. I don't think that that's unreasonable, especially as a minor use permit, which is done in-house. Yeah.
And I don't know if it's we're not being asked to make that change tonight, to go all the way to just an A in that table 2.1, just allowed by right, correct?
That's not the staff recommendation.
Right, right, okay. Do you have anything else to try to persuade us on that, if you have a strong
I
feeling?
was just wanting to raise the question, not persuade, but I would like to know, what is the cost of a minor use permit?
I believe in total, the application fee for a minor use permit is about $3,900, close to $4,000.
Wow.
So then this project that was discussed would have to pay that and then apply for the process to bring it back to residents?
Yes, so let's say if they did have a commercial building, they would need to obtain a minor use permit to bring it back to a residence, and also go through the building permit process as well in order to change the occupancy of the structure.
What if there's no changes proposed and it's just, and they don't need a building permit?
A building permit would still be required for the occupancy change. I'm not sure as to what the exact details would be required for plan check review, but a permit would be required for occupancy change.
Commissioner Tully.
Okay, so it disappeared inadvertently in the 2018 update. Prior to 2018, what was it on the, and if you said it, I'm sorry, what was it on the chart prior to 2018?
It was allowable with a minor use permit.
Okay, so nothing's really, it's more or less a cleanup is what we're here for right now. Okay, thanks.
I have another question. So if someone had a residence and they want to go to commercial in the CN zone, you'd have to use a minor use permit also?
It would depend on the use, how it's allowed in the CN zone. Some
Okay.
commercial uses are just allowed by right. Others may require some additional use permit approval.
So like daycare, for example?
Let's see here.
We don't have to grind to a complete halt on that, but I was just wondering if that, I'm just trying to, yeah, that fee is an eye opener, and we, somewhere recently I read about our mayor's desire to streamline and to minimize fees. And I don't know if this is one such that could be streamlined, but that seems potentially like a lot.
To answer your question about a daycare, that would be allowed in the CN zone. So no separate use permit approval would be required.
Okay, okay.
I have a question. Is there, for the record, is there anything lower than a minor use permit but not allowed by right? Or is that the first level tier?
We don't have like a really minor use?
Super minor?
It's the first level tier.
Okay.
It's a use.
Yeah,
So, I mean,
Okay,
we need to call it what it is.
got it. Thank you.
Well, I think we need to move toward, unless, are there any other items?
I
Commissioner
have one
Flores?
more question on it. Usually you get a minor use permit because there's several things to look at beyond like a building permit. Like commercial has different standards for occupancy than residential. So going back, I realized that maybe some components of a residence were changed for commercial occupancy, maybe restrooms or whatever is required. But I'm not sure I see the need when you're going back to residential to necessarily make changes. So I'm wondering if a minor use permit is really needed.
You're thinking about things like egress and,
Are we talking about
Access.
changes to the building? Or are we I'm not following what your question's referring to.
Just the use and not needing to pull a building permit and making changes to the structure if they don't need to do that. Just
A
wondering.
building permit's required to change occupancy types, regardless of the scale and scope of the changes to the building. I don't have an
Why?
answer for you off the top of my tongue as to the
Okay.
why, but it's a documentation process that needs to happen through the building permit review process. So whether ADA compliance goes away, it's not required. You know, it happens when you go from residential to commercial, certain requirements when you go back. It's mainly for documentation, and there may be other factors of review. I just don't know what those are.
Commissioner Jorgen, oh, I'm sorry.
The minor use permit kind of makes you go through that check process that you could have missed otherwise, is what you're saying.
Well, the minor use permit is a review of whether it's a good idea or not to allow the use to change, regardless of the changes to the building. So we're talking about, I think, two different things. One of them is, what's the context of the neighborhood? What's the historic use of the site? What is the project being proposed? Is it a demolition and new development? Is it just going back to converting the building from commercial to residential? There's just a variety of factors that we would review that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, when you mentioned documentation, I realized that for insurance purposes, the insurer is going to want to know, is it commercial and there'll be commercial liability insurance, or is it residential and it'll be a different kind of insurance? And they would certainly want that documentation themselves, that they're funding or insuring a particular use that has been documented. So that'd be one of probably many issues that require documentation these days.
Yeah, the lender will want to know too.
Yeah.
Commissioner Khan.
One of the things that might be different is like a residence might have a different smoke detector standard, and your building permit would catch that as to if there's one in every bedroom or not, or, so I think there's minor differences like that in between the commercial and the residential that they'd look for in the building permit. Exits or garbage can locations or.
Well, if I can try to bring us towards a conclusion on this, I think the fee is sort of an eye-opener, I think, for all of us, but that's not really on our agenda to take that apart. And what is shifting this square in Table 2.1 from blank to MUP. And unless we have other comments, I'd be ready to entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve this item.
I'll second the motion to approve the item.
We have a motion and a second. Do we have any further discussion on this topic? Hearing none, I'll ask for a roll call vote from Deputy City Clerk.
Commissioner Tully,
Yes.
Commissioner Flores,
Yes.
Commissioner Jorgensen,
Yes.
Commissioner Khan,
Yes.
Vice Chair Houghton.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you, and thank you again for the comments. Okay, and I think that we've done a little bit of cleanup here. So would Deputy Community Development Director Tyler Corey please provide the update?
All right, well, thank you, commissioners. Kind of looking out at the agenda forecast. We have I'm going to forecast out 2 hearings. The next one is regularly scheduled for June 26th. Currently, we have 2 items that are going to be coming before you on the 26th. First one is an appeal of a decision by the director approving a development review of a minor mixed-use project in the Railroad Historic District. This is at 1925 Santa Barbara. And then the second item is a major development review of a new about 22,000 square foot commercial building. And this is, I think I mentioned this before, at 10 Higuera. It's the back of the site where Central Coast Brewery and Crowbar are fronting that property. And this is a new building towards the back of that site. That's coming to you from with a recommendation from the Architecture Review Commission. And then looking out to July 10th, we just have one item currently scheduled. It's also an appeal of the director's decision to deny a homestay permit, and this is at 1137 Peach Street.
Was that previously scheduled for the 26th?
It was previously scheduled for the 26th, but it was got moved out to the 10th of July.
Okay, thank you.
Isn't the major 22,000 square foot on 10 Higuera by Crowbar, isn't that where the towing company is? No.
I don't think so.
Okay. College Towing. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you for the look ahead on the crystal ball. And we are ready to wrap this up. The next regular meeting of the Planning Commission scheduled for June 26th, 2024 at 6:00 p.m. in the council chambers of City Hall, 990 Palm Street, San Luis Obispo. And we just got confirmation that actually will be a meeting, so we'll see you then, and we are adjourned.